Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to look at the completely fascinating, uniquely human story behind an object you probably used this very morning without giving it a second thought. We are tracing the interlocking history of the zipper. But this isn't just some dry story about gears and metal. It's actually a story about human frustration, tragic heartbreak, and a 70-year relay race to solve one of the most tedious problems of daily life. To really understand why this matters, I need you to imagine living in the late 1800s. Just imagine waking up, rolling out of bed, and knowing you have to face your boots. You didn't just casually tie your shoes back then. You had to physically thread these rigid, stiff laces through a dozen tiny, stubborn hooks and eyelets, one by one, every single morning. And then, at the end of a long, exhausting day, you had to undo the whole intricate mess just to go to sleep. It was a deeply tactile, everyday annoyance. And this brilliantly illustrates the reality of the era. Millions of people simply accepted this dragging, time-consuming chore as the totally unavoidable cost of wearing shoes. Nobody had really stepped back and said, hey, there has to be a better way. It was just a universal human frustration waiting for a solution. Or, well, actually, scratch that. As we're about to see, one person had thought about it, but they left the idea completely untouched. Our story begins with the first runner in our generational relay race, Elias Howe. Now, in 1851, Howe was already a super famous, wealthy inventor thanks to his creation of the sewing machine. Because he was so busy revolutionizing the entire way clothes were made, he really didn't have the time, or the care, frankly, to worry about how people fastened their footwear. But he did have a fleeting moment of genius. Howe's original 1851 patent phrase actually called it an automatic, continuous clothing closure. He even sketched out an early sliding fastener concept. It was a true glimpse of a changed world. But Howe never developed it. He just let this brilliant idea gather dust in the patent office while he enjoyed his sewing machine wealth. He basically dropped the baton right out of the gate. It would take decades for another inventor to pick up that thread. While Howe was busy enjoying his wealth, decades later in Chicago, a mechanical engineer named Whitcomb Judson was driven by a deeply personal, everyday irritation. Unlike Howe, Judson wasn't trying to change the whole clothing industry. He absolutely despised lacing and unlacing his boots every single time he put them on or took them off. He just wanted a mechanical way to bypass all that fiddly lacing. Judson was so fed up that his own 1891 patent application explicitly called out this frustration. He literally wrote about the annoyances of the process. So the crucial point here is that this wasn't just abstract engineering for Judson. It was a personal vendetta against a tedious chore. He got to work designing what he called the Clasp-Locker, a hook-and-eye fastening device that mechanically interlocked, promising to replace minutes of lacing with one single smooth motion. By May of 1893, Judson had refined his design and landed an improved patent, and he decided to introduce his Clasp-Locker to the world on literally the biggest stage imaginable, the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Imagine the excitement, the anticipation. He was totally ready to show millions of people how they could banish the annoyance of boot laces forever with his single, smooth device. But then, it completely flopped. The Clasp-Locker was incredibly clumsy, it was prone to popping open at the exact worst moments, and it jammed constantly. Just imagine the chaotic humiliation of standing there at the magnificent World's Fair, trying to demonstrate the future of footwear, and your device just gets stubbornly stuck. The public reception was, to put it gently, very poor. Judson didn't give up entirely, though. He partnered with a businessman named Colonel Lewis Walker, and together, they founded the Universal Fastener Company to try and manufacture and sell the Clasp-Locker. But despite all their desperate efforts and funding, the invention remained a total commercial failure. The hook-and-eye design was just too fundamentally flawed to work reliably in everyday life. In the year 1909, Whitcomb Judson passed away. At the time of his quiet death, his invention was still unloved and entirely unsuccessful. He had dedicated years to solving this problem, only to leave the world without ever seeing it catch on. The word zipper didn't even exist yet. The baton was on the ground once again. But hey, the relay race wasn't over. The baton was picked up by Gideon Sundback, a Swedish-American engineer working at Judson's struggling Universal Fastener Company. He decided to take Judson's deeply flawed concept entirely back to the drawing board. But his real turning point? It didn't come from a boardroom meeting. It came from an absolute tragedy. In 1911, Sundback suffered a devastating loss. His wife, Elvira, passed away. In the quiet, dark aftermath of this heartbreak, Sundback needed something to pour his mind and soul into. So he threw himself entirely, relentlessly into solving this fastener problem. His grief literally became the engine for one of the greatest practical redesigns in modern history. And this is where the mechanical brilliance really shines through. Sundback realized those old hooks and eyes were the problem, so he completely redesigned the mechanism, shifting away from those clumsy hooks to a highly secure design relying on small interlocking metal teeth that were pulled together by a sliding tab. It was smooth, it was reliable, and it did not pop open. On April 29, 1913, Sundback patented this design under the name Hookless Fastener No. 1. It was the quiet, monumental triumph of the modern zipper. Born out of a widower's grief and his relentless dedication, Sundback had finally solved the mechanical puzzle that had so frustrated Judson and eluded Howe. He had created a nearly perfect design. But as it turns out, having a flawless mechanical design wasn't quite enough. Sundback had perfected the object, but the invention itself still desperately needed an identity. It needed a catchy reason to conquer the world and convince people to change their habits. Because let's be honest, Hookless Fastener No. 1 just wasn't going to capture the public's imagination. That missing piece finally arrived a full decade later, in 1923. The B.F. Goodrich Company decided to take a chance and use Sundback's fastener on a brand new line of rubber boots and galoshes. They loved the design, but a clever marketing team at the boot company knew they needed a way better name to sell it to the masses. They needed to give the invention its big break. And here is where history is made. Someone at B.F. Goodrich coined a playful, brilliantly catchy new word, zipper. It was onomatopoeia, meant to mimic that quick, satisfying zip sound the fastener made when you pulled it closed. So the crucial point is that this one catchy word finally gave the invention the immortal, memorable identity it had been missing all those decades. With a flawless design and a perfect name, the zipper's rise was just unstoppable. It found early, vital use in military gear during the trenches of World War I. By the late 1920s, it had spread into everyday bags and footwear. And by the mid-1930s, the high fashion industry had fully embraced it, weaving zippers into garments in beautiful, complex ways that a fumbling Whitcomb Judson at the World's Fair could never have even imagined. Looking back at this whole journey, it's pretty clear this isn't the story of one single flash of genius. It's an intergenerational relay race. Elias Howe sketched the idea in 1851 and walked away. Whitcomb Judson built it in 1893 and watched it fail. Gideon Sundback, working through intense grief, quietly fixed it in 1913. And finally, in 1923, a marketing team gave it the name that made it iconic. 70. It took more than 70 years of human struggle, personal annoyance, and deep emotional grief to pass that baton across the finish line. 4 different people, across different generations, all contributing to a singular goal: to save you and me a few seconds of daily hassle when we get dressed in the morning. So I want to leave you with this thought as we wrap up the explainer today. It's so easy to take the small things for granted, but the next time you pull up the zipper on your jacket or your bag, take a moment to look at those tiny interlocking teeth. Ask yourself, whose legacy are you actually holding in your hand? Is it Howe's, Judson's, Sundback's, or the unnamed marketers? It's literally an everyday miracle, built by all of them.